Hello guys and welcome to this project. In this one we are going to build a task manager, and I would like to say that my focus for this project is to help you understand structure of how you can set up a back-end application with Node and Express and the front end with React. But technically we're going to be focusing on the back end because I expect that you already have some knowledge of React. Now, in this application, we're going to be able to perform the CRUD operation, CRUD, which stands for create, read, update, and delete. And we're going to be able to refactor our code and structure it in the way that it should be if we were creating a professional application. So let me show you what this app does. First off, I'll try to add a task. So here, I'm just going to say task 1, hit enter, and then you see the task is added. Let's add another one. So task 2 hit enter, and then that's the task added. We can update a task. So for example, if I click on this edit icon, I can just come here and say task 1 updated. So let me just make that simple. Hit enter, and then you see we have that task 1 updated. We can set a task to completed by clicking on this green check mark here. So if I click on the second one, you will see here that we have the task 2 completed. Now the last thing we can do is to delete a task. So if I want to delete the first task, for example, I can just click on the delete icon, and then that task is gone. So one of the other things you notice is that we have a task total, or a total task count, and currently it's 1, and then the completed task is also set to 1. So that's the application we're going to be building in this project. It's going to be an exciting one, and let's get started. All right, now let's set up our project. So I'll open this my MERN course folder, and all right, I have it on my other screen, and I'll just create a new folder inside of it. So Control Shift N, and then I'll just call that folder MERN task app. All right, hit enter, and let me open this folder in Visual Studio Code. So I'll right click, and then I'll just say git bash here, which is how I just like to open my project. I'll say code and dot, and if I hit enter, it's going to open that new empty folder I just created in Visual Studio Code. All right, so I have it here in my other screen. I'm just going to drag it in so we can see. Yeah, so this is the folder. I like to have my project side by side. Yeah, so this is fine. It's a perfect setup. Now, what do we want to do? What we want to do now is we want to initialize our we want to initialize this project with npm. So let me just close this get started, and then I'll just open up my terminal. So open up your terminal, and in your terminal I'm just gonna say npm init, and I'll just say -y. So npm init -y, and I'll hit enter. What this will do is that it will create a package.json file. Now we've seen this before, actually. That's why I actually wanted to do some of those basics before. All right, so you see here now we now have package.json. Inside of this package.json, if you open that, you see some, just boilerplate that we have here, and that's fine. I'll close this up for now. Now that I have package.json, what this means is that I can install some things that we need. All right, so for me, I'm just going to install Express first. Why? Because Express is the framework that we need to what's it called, create our backend. So I'm just going to say npm and then install Express, then I'll hit enter. So give that a couple of seconds because it should take just a few seconds to install. All right, so installation of Express is complete. Now, next, I'm going to create a special folder that's going to contain all of the files and folders of the backend code. So I'll click on this point here because I want to create that folder in the root. I'll click on this new folder, and then I'll just call this backend and hit enter. So this is my backend folder. So subsequently, when we start working on the front end, I'm also going to have a front end folder that's just going to be side by side the back end folder. Now, this brings us to a question. When you want to create a full stack app, where do you start? Now, for my personal preference, I prefer to start with the back end. So creating the back end, I'll create all the API endpoints and everything that needs to be on the back end and the server. And then when I start creating the front end, I'll just be interacting directly with the back end that has already been, set for me. So that's just how I like to set up things. Some people like to create the front end first, but I think most people like to start with the back end. And as we go ahead, you're going to see why creating the back end is kind of better. So inside of this backend folder, I'm going to create the server folder. So let's just do server. Is that server? Okay, server.js. So that's going to be our root folder where we're going to, have our app created, our Express app created. All right, great. So because I would like to have this what's it called, the course broken down into several parts, so this is going to be the setup video. In the next one, now we're going to create our Express server. All right, thank you so much. I'll see you in the next one. All right, guys, so now in this one we are going to create a server with Express.js. So but before I do that, I would like to initialize this project with git. So I'll just come here and I'll say git init to initialize the project. I'll hit enter and it will initialize the project, and just give it a few seconds. All right, so you see here we now have this number here, 428, which means that there are 428 files currently in this folder. But what you want to do is you want to add a git ignore file, because this node modules is a very large file. You don't want that to be pushed to GitHub. So I'm just going to come here, create a file, and I'll call that .git ignore. Then I'll hit enter, and then inside of this .git ignore file, I'm just going to specify that I don't want to push the node underscore modules folder, and then I'll save that. So watch what happens to this number here. Okay, so you see now it now says 4. So technically there are 4 files that we need to we're going to push to what's it called, GitHub, if we ever decide to push. All right, so that's it for this one. Then also I would be creating branches for every section in this particular video. So the way you can do that is I'll just click here and I'll create my first commit. So I'll just say initial commit, or no, I'll just say project setup, because that's what the previous video was about. I'll copy the I'll press Control and enter to create that commit, and then I'll just create a new branch. So I'll come here, click on master, and then I'll say create new branch from. The name of the branch is going to be 1 and project setup. I'll hit enter, and then I'll create that branch from the master branch which I worked on previously. All right, great. So now what this means is that when I upload to GitHub, you're going to see all the sections. So project setup, and then like that, you're going to see all the sections that we work with. I'll go back to the master branch, and then we're going to set up our node server. So to set up your node server, we're going to come here inside of our server.js, and remember the first thing we need to do is we need to bring in Express. So I'll say const Express, and that's going to be equal to require. You see, I'm a little bit faster here because we've done this before. So I'll say require Express, right? So we've brought in Express, and then I'm going to initialize Express by saying Express, and like that I'll call it, but I want it to be assigned to a variable name called app. All right, now that I've done that, all right, so next we need to listen for our Express app. So I'm going to say app.listen, and then I'll just open that up. And here, remember, the first thing we did was we added a port number. Now, in the previous example we worked with when we created our first Express app, we actually added the number 5000 here. But remember, this application we're creating is going to be on Heroku server. This particular one is going to be on Heroku server. and Heroku server is going to provide us with the port number. So it doesn't make sense to specify the port number like this. So you know what we do? In that case, what we do is that we create a special file, which is a .env file. Env just stands for environment, and technically that's where we store some variables that that is likely going to change when we upload our application to the server. Now, I've not created the .env file now, but what I'm going to do is I'll create a variable and I'll call that variable port. So this is going to be capital letter port, because when we save things in our .env file, the convention is to use capital letters. So capital letter port, and for me to reference what exists in my .env file, I'm going to say process.env, then the name of the variable in the .env file. Like I said, .env file is just a special file that we're going to create, and we're going to store variables that would likely maybe change when we upload our application to the server, or variables that we don't want to be uploaded to GitHub. So maybe like your API keys, for example, you don't want that to be uploaded to GitHub. You're going to save it in your .env file. So in this one, port is going to be process.env dot and then the variable name that's going to be called port. Now I'm not going to add an or, so or, and then I'll then say 5000. So what this means is that when we upload our application to Heroku, it's going to first look for this variable name in our .env file, and you don't even need to create this. It's automatically created in Heroku. All right, now let's come here. So instead of saying 5000 here, I'm going to point to this port. So I'll come here and say I want to connect to the port variable. I'll add a comma, and then I'll now add my callback function. So the callback function, let's open it up with an arrow function and do a console.log. So console.log, and I'll just use my backticks here because I want to actually point back to this port. So in the backticks, I'll say server running on port, and then I would use my string interpolation syntax to say port. All right, so that's about it for setting up our server. We're done setting up our server. All I just need to do now is to save this file and then come here and run. Let's just do something simple. I'll just say node. Sorry, I just need to expand this so that you can see it clearly. Okay, so here I'll say node, and what's the name of this file? Server. So server, and then I'll hit enter. So let's see if it works. I'm getting some kind of error. Let me just be sure. Oh, okay, I think maybe I made a typographical error somewhere. So what does it say here? Node server cannot find module. Okay, I think I know what's wrong. So the slight problem we had is that the server is not in the root folder. So from this task app, we're just pointing directly to the server. So what we should have technically done is we should have said node, and then we first go into the back end. You know, we have a back end folder, this folder here, right? Before we now created the server inside of the back end folder. So we'll say back end first, then / server, and that's it. So let me just add the .js and then hit enter, and that should just work perfect. All right, so you see now we now get this information here, server running on port 5000. Great. So now we've been able to create our server and it works perfectly. So in the next one, we're going to, you know, make it such that we can run our command from the package.json file. All right, see you there. All right, so now let's set up such that we can start our server from the package.json. So I'm going to come to my package.json and I'm going to add a script. So just like we did before, I'll first add a start script, and this start script is just going to be what we use on our server, Heroku server. So it's just going to say node, and it's first going to go into the back end folder. Then it's now going to look for the server.js. All right. But also remember that this our main here, which specifies our main entry point, our main file to open up our server, it needs to be server.js. So server.js. Great. Now the next command I'm going to run is going to be for the back end. So here I'll just delete this start and say back end. Then instead of saying node, I'm going to say node mon. Remember we installed a package called node mon that enables us to continuously monitor our server when we make changes to it. Node doesn't have that capacity, so that's why we installed node mon. And we installed node mon globally. So if you didn't install node mon globally, let me just show you. So npm install node mon, and to make it global you have to say -g and hit enter. Now if you didn't install nodemon globally, then you just have to install nodemon and then say -d to make it a dependency package. All right, so just go ahead and do that. But personally I installed nodemon globally, so that means I don't need to install it on every project. Right, so let me save this guy and let's try and run our server one more time just to make sure that everything works perfect. I'll come here and I'll say first run node, sorry, npm start. I'll hit enter. Let's see if it starts our server. Okay, so you see here we have server running on port 5000. Then let me Control C to close this guy up. Then let me clear. Sorry, that should be clear. So clear. All right, great. Now I'm going to say npm run backend. Hit enter. So I just want to test these two scripts that I've created. Okay, so nodemon starting. Voila, so you see server running on port 5000. So we've successfully been able to write scripts to run our backend of our application. All right, see you in the next one. All right, welcome back guys. Now I want us to see how we can use some API testing tools to make our work a little bit faster. Although we've seen in the previous video that we can test our API on the browser, but that's not actually efficient for so many processes. So before we actually download those tools, we actually need to have at least a single route in our application. Remember, we have our server running on port 5000. So I'm going to come down here and create a route. So let me just add a comment here and say routes like so, and then I'll just create a app.get route, and that route is going to point to just the home page, so /. And remember, it's supposed to take a callback function. So let me open that up with an arrow function, and here I will slot in my request and response, which we've seen in the previous section. And what do I want to do here? Well, what response do I want to send to the browser? Well, I'll say response.send, and then I'm just going to say homepage. So very simple process here. Now this is the homepage route. I'll go ahead and save that. We created this route because you need at least a single route to be able to test. Now come over to your browser and just search for download Postman. If you click on the first result, it should bring you to this page where you can download Postman for your operating system. In my case, I'm using Windows. Then search for Insomnia. Click on the first result, it will bring you to this page where you can download Insomnia. So these are the two API testing softwares that we are going to have a look at. So for me, I'll just close all of these guys that I'm not using, and then I'll just minimize this. Now what I want you to do is, first off, I'll show you Postman, how to use Postman. The reason why I'm showing you Postman and Insomnia is because Postman is so popular, right? I just want to make you have a feel of it. But for me, I believe Insomnia is a little bit more user friendly, to use. So let's start with Postman. Remember, if you just come here and you type localhost port 5000, and you hit enter, it will bring you to this route. So you see here we just have homepage. Great. So now let's start with Postman, which I said is very popular. Yeah, so I'll open Postman. If you're opening Postman for the first time, maybe yours will be in light mode, but I think I've done some settings, so I've put it in dark mode. It's better for me, my eyes. Now for you to create a request, because it's a HTTP request, for you to create a request, all you need to do first is to click on this plus icon. If you click on the plus icon, by the way, I think you need to sign into Postman. So see this guy here, this icon here that says manage accounts. If you click on that, you'll be required to maybe sign in. All right, so just quickly create an account if you want to use Postman. So but if you click on this plus icon, it will give you the option to add your URL. So in my case, my URL is localhost port 5000. You can leave the forward slash, you can remove it, it doesn't change anything. And then you need to specify the kind of request you want to make. So in my case, it's a get request. So if you click on this option here, you'll see all the various kinds of requests, but let's just leave it as get because that's a request. We want to get something. Now let's click on send. Voila. So you see here we have the home page, right, which is exactly what we had in the browser. So we've been able to test this, API endpoints, which is the home route, localhost 5000. Let me show you something else though. Because in an application you build, you're going to have several API endpoints, several URL that you want to test. It's good to put all of them in like a folder, in like a collection, so that they are not scattered all over the place. So you see this panel here on the left. If you click on create collection, you have the option to create like a collection of URLs that you want to test. So now I'll give this collection a name. In my case, I'll just call it task manager, because that's what the project I want to create, and hit enter. So now we have this task manager here. So I'll just close that because it's right here, task manager. Now you see this first URL we created. Let's save it inside of this task manager. So I'll just come here and then I'll click Control Save, Control S. It will ask me for the name of this request. So I'll just call it home page. So home page, and then I would select which folder I want to save it, or which collection I want to save it. I want to save it inside task manager. So select task manager and then click on save. Voila. So you see inside of this task manager, now we now have this home page. So like if you had maybe multiple routes, you had another route, let's just create another route very quickly. So I'll make this one a post request, even though I've not created any post request, and I'll just say / tasks, plural. So task, like that, and then I'll save it. So if you try to save it, let's just say we want to get we want to create a task. Create a task. So now if you want to save it, you see we have the option to save it inside of this workspace here, right? So I'll just click on save, and as you can see, we now have the home page request and the create a task request. That's essentially how Postman works. So if you feel like you like the way Postman is set up, for me, I think it's, the user experience is not as fantastic as Insomnia, which is what I prefer. So if you want to use that, you can just continue with this, and every time we test, you can use Postman. I'm doing this because Postman is very popular. So I'll bring this down, and then we're going to do the same thing in Insomnia. And moving on, we're going to continue using Insomnia. If you've downloaded Insomnia and you open it, you should see something like this. Now mine, I already have like a folder I've created here that contains some routes, but let me show you. So right here, you can create a new request. So if you click on this new document, right, you will see okay, that's not what I actually want to click on. There's a shortcut though. So if you click on Control N, I think it will just create a new document. So now when you've created a new document here like that, you can then specify the URL you want to test. In our case, it's localhost port 5000. Now I'm just going to test it right away. So I'll click on send, and you see it's loading. Okay, so you see here we now have this home page here. So just look at the layout of Insomnia. It's kind of cleaner and easier to use. So moving on, I'm going to be using Insomnia to test my application, all right, and to do every kind of testing we want to do throughout this project. But if you prefer Postman, by all means go ahead and use Postman. All right, so that's about it for this one. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. All right, so in this one, we're going to connect our application to a database. In our case, it's the MongoDB database. So I'll open my browser up, and then I'm going to go to mongodb.com, because MongoDB has a cloud service where you can just have your database in the cloud and you can just access it right there on the website. So when you do this, you're going to need to have to create an account. So I'm just going to click on sign in. And because I want you to actually have like the same experience that a new MongoDB user is going to have, I'm going to sign in with a new account, especially for this tutorial or especially for this course. So let's just do that. So it's asking me to accept their terms and conditions, which I'm going to accept and submit. All right, so I have been able to successfully sign in, and let's just see what it's asking me to do next. Use your account to deploy a cloud database. All right, so it's redirecting itself automatically into the MongoDB dashboard. All right, so what is your goal today? And I'm just going to say build a new application. And what type of application are you building? Well, I want to build, I'm just going to choose something, I don't know. Let me just choose orders. Oh, I need to specify orders. So I'm just going to choose something, and so that I can move on. What's your preferred language? JavaScript, and then finish. All right, so next is asking me to choose a plan. And of course, I know you know the plan I'm going to choose because this is for tutorial purposes. I'm going to choose the free plan. So just come to the free plan and click on create, and then it's just going to create a free plan for you. Okay, great. So let's continue our setup. It's bringing us to it. MongoDB has created a cluster for us, so we just need to, specify some settings. I'll just leave this as they are, and I'll come down here. All right, then I'll change my cluster name. So this cluster name, it's always cluster 0. So maybe I'll just change it to something that makes sense to me. Maybe I'll just say my name, Zeno Trust Cluster. Okay, there shouldn't be any space. So Zeno Trust Cluster, and then I'll click on create cluster. It's going to take a while, so let me just hold on for it to finish. Oh, okay, great. So that was really fast. Now it's asking me, how would you like to authenticate your connection? I'm just going to go with username and password, which is like the most straightforward. And then I'm going to specify a username. I'll make it simple. I'll say Zeno1234. And the password is also going to be Zeno1234. So Zeno1234. You know what? Let me just make sure that I copy that correctly. So I'll just, oh, I can view it. So let me click on this eye icon. Yeah, so Zeno1234 is just perfect. Of course, if you want to do a production project, you make sure your password is a little bit more secure. Then I'll click on create user. Aha, so if you come down here, you'll see that this user has been created, Zeno1234. Yeah, good. So now it's asking me, where would you like to connect from? Well, I want to connect from my local environment. That's from my machine. Okay, so let's keep going down, and so it's asking me the IP address. I should allow a specific IP address that I want to connect from, right? So ideally you just want to click on add my current IP address, and it will just automatically fetch your IP address. So of course I'll have mine covered, so add my IP address, and then I will just click on finish and close. So that, just do that. Okay, so it says congratulations on setting up access rules, just telling us something. So just click on go to database. So I'll click that. All right, so let me just close this up. No thanks, dismiss. Okay, great. So you see here we now have this Zeno cluster. Now there's one thing I want us to do though. I want us to be able to connect, to change our security rules. At this point we set it such that it can connect from only our IP address, but I've experienced some issues with that, because sometimes my IP address tend to, depending on my internet connection, it tends to change. So you may want to set it to connect from any IP address or from anywhere. So that's what we're going to do now. So I think we need to come to, is it network access, secure, yeah, network database access. Let's just be sure, let's just check. Okay, so it's network access. So click on network access, and it will show you what you've already set before. So just click on edit. All right, so I've edited this guy now, and what I want to click on is allow access from anywhere. For the purpose of this project, I want to allow access from anywhere. Now, if you're launching on production, you should definitely stick to allowing maybe your IP address alone. So I'll click on allow access for anywhere, and it will just change the access list entry to this guy here. And then you can just click on confirm. So this will mitigate any future issues you may have with connecting to your database as a result of your IP address access. All right, so let me just hold on for a couple of seconds for this one. All right, so that's complete. And now let's go back to the database. So under this deployment, you can come here to database, which is where we were before. All right, so now under Atlas, you see all of these options here. Now, what you want to do is you want to connect your application to MongoDB. So I'm going to click on connect, and it will just bring up all the options that we can connect with. So you see the first one is connect with MongoDB shell. That's not what we want. Just the second one just says connect your application. Now this is what we're going to use. There's another option to connect using MongoDB Compass, which is like an a desktop application that you can download to your computer and then connect MongoDB directly. So you don't need to come to your browser, but I think the browser is fine really. So I'll just click on connect your application, and then it will give you this connection string. Yeah, so this connection string is what you want to have to be able to connect to your application. And let me just copy it. So I'll just click on this tab here to copy that. Aha, so you see it's copied. Now we can close this guy, or let me just minimize the browser, and then I can come back to my application. For now, I'm just going to paste it somewhere here like so. Maybe I'll just make it a comment and just paste it. So this is my connection string that I've been able to retrieve from MongoDB. What I want to do, however, is to keep it in a special file that will not be uploaded to the cloud, that will not be uploaded to GitHub, because you don't want other people to have access to this string. For that, we're going to need to create a .env file. Now, in backend development with Node.js and Express, when you want to use .env file, you first have to install a package called .env. So I'm going to cancel out of this process in my terminal here, and I'm going to install, so Y for yes to cancel out of it, and I'm going to install .env. How am I going to do that? Well, I'm just going to say npm install, and the name of the package is dots, so DOTENV, and then just hit enter. It will install that .env package, and we're going to be able to use .env in our project. All right, so .env has finished installing. Now we can go ahead and create an actual .env file in the root of this our directory. So you're not creating it inside the backend or any other place. You are creating it in the root. So it's going to be on the same level as your package.json file and as your gitignore file. So I'll make sure I'm here, and then I'll click and create .env. Now this .env file is where we're going to now add this URL we created here. So make sure you copy that and then come here. The name of the URL I'm going to call Mongo, and it's convention to use capital letter here. So Mongo underscore URI. URI stands for Uniform Resource Identifier, and then I'll set it to be equal to, and then paste in this string here. Now there are some things we want to change. First off, this password, you need to actually put the password you created on the cloud, and that's Zeno1234. So I'll just delete this password here, and then I'll add my Zeno. Sorry, that should be small letter, so Zeno1234. Then another thing we're going to do is before this question mark and retry writes, we're going to specify the name of our cluster, or sorry, the name of our collection. So in MongoDB, your data is going to be saved inside something that looks like a folder. That thing is actually called a collection, right? So the name of that collection you can specify after this /. So mongodb.net / after this / before the question mark, you can specify the name of the collection. So in my case, I'm just going to call it task manager. So task hyphen manager, like so. Yeah, that's correct. And that's it basically. I'll go ahead and save. Now, if I save any document to this, my MongoDB setup in the cloud, it's going to be inside the task manager collection. All right. So that's basically what I just did here. Now we've been able to, set up our MongoDB. We've been able to create the Mongo URI. In the next video, because I want this to be broken down into several parts, in the next video, we are going to now write the code to connect to MongoDB. Alright guys, so now we've been able to get our MongoDB URI, we've set up MongoDB, get the URI, and we've saved it inside the .env file. Side note, I should let you know that every time you make a change to your .env file, you need to close your process in your terminal and restart your backend again, so that it will pick up that change. All right, so now that that's out of the way, let's connect to MongoDB. For us to connect to MongoDB, there is a package that makes it super easy for us to connect, and that package is called Mongoose. So I'm going to install it by saying npm, that should be in small letter, so npm install Mongoose, like so, and hit enter, and then it should install. Alright, so Mongoose has finished installing, and if you want to confirm your installation, just go to package.json and you're going to see everything that we've been installing so far. So we have 3 packages so far, which is fair. I'll close that. Now, how do we connect to MongoDB using this package we just installed? Well, there are 2 methods that I currently have in my mind, and I'm going to show it to you so you can decide which one you prefer. In programming, there is something called separation of concerns. As much as possible, you want to isolate different part of your code that performs a specific task. It makes your code easier to manage and maintain as it grows bigger. So what I'm going to do is my connection to Mongoose, I'm going to put it inside its own special file, or its own special folder, sorry. So inside of my backend folder, I'm going to create another folder. I'll call that folder config, which sounds like configuration folder. So anything like, connecting to the database and doing some configuration operation is going to be here. Inside of this config folder, however, I'm going to create a file which I'm going to call connect. So connect db, so db is going to be capital letter .js, and then I'll hit enter. Inside of this is where I'll now write my code to connect to the database, and this is the first method that I want to show you. This method is based on the concept of separation of concerns, which is a programming concept that we should all use and we should all know. Alright, so first off, you need to bring in Mongoose, which is the package we installed. I'm going to say const and Mongoose, and that's going to be equal to, remember when you're bringing in package in this setting here, you're going to say require, and what's the name? Same, Mongoose. So now we've brought in Mongoose, we can now use it in our application. But before then, let's make sure we export this file. So to export it, I'm just going to say module.export, and I'll just set it to be equal to, what's the name of this file? The name of this file is connectdb, so I'll just use the same name, connectdb. Exactly. Now it's in the middle that I will now, write my function to connect to the database. All right, so now let's do that. I'll create an asynchronous arrow function, and this is just a snippet that I've created to help me make my life a little bit easier. All right, so I'll call that function connect db, like so, and that's the function that I'm actually exporting here. Now let's open that up right here, and inside of this function I would introduce a try catch block. So I'll say try catch, and inside the try block is where I will now execute the connection to MongoDB. All right, so let's do this. I'll say const connect, so let's attach it to a variable named connect, and I'll set it to be equal to await, because we are using async here. So async await, so I'm going to await my mongoose dot connect. Remember, this mongoose is actually pointing to this variable name we created here. So mongoose.connect, and then this is going to take an argument which is going to be the connection URI. So you see this connection URI we brought in here. this is where we're going to make reference to it. So mongoose.connect, and that URI will now come in here. How do we actually reference a variable inside of our .env file? Well, we're going to say process.env. Okay, so that's process.environment. So let's do that. Process.env, and then dot the name of the variable. So in our case, it's mongo underscore URI. Just to be sure, I'll just take a look at it again. So mongo underscore URI, that's correct. Great. So I've basically, this is going to help me connect to that URI I added in my .env file. Now I'll now come down here and let me just do a console.log. So I'll say log something to the console, and I'll just add a backticks here, and then I'll just say mongo. You know what? Let me just log something to the console. I'll say MongoDB connected, and then I would add like a variable. So I'll use string interpolation here, and then I'm just going to say connect. You don't have to do this, but I just want to do it. So connect dot, and then connection dot host. This will give me access to the connection host. All right, now let's come to the catch block. So this catch block, if there's any error, you just want to catch the error. Well, I just want to simply log that error to the console. So I'll just do console.log, and I'll just log the error. Then if there's an error, I want to exit out of the process. So I'll say process dot exit. Okay, and just add one here. So this will make sure that we exit out of the process if there's an error and the application doesn't move forward. So this is essentially how you can connect to MongoDB. Now it's time for the moment of truth, which is where we actually test out this part of our code. So first off, I'm going to go to my server.js. I think I'll just close this .env file. I'll go to server.js, and I'll first need to bring in the connect db function. So I'll say const connect db, which is equal to, don't forget we're going to require it, and now we are going to point to the location of that function. So where is it located? I'll open quotes here, and I'll just say ./, and then I'll go inside the config folder, and then the connect db file. So that's it basically. Now for us to execute this function inside of this place where we are here, I'm just going to come down here and just come down here and just connect to the database. You know what, I'll just connect to the database just immediately after I create the app. So I'll say connect db, and then I'll call it. So by calling this function, it's going to attempt to connect to the database, and if the connection is successful, one of the ways that we can know is that there will be a console.log. So this MongoDB connected, and it will give us the connection host. All right, so that's one of the ways we can know that it has been connected successfully. Now let's actually come here and run our backend and see if everything works fine. Hopefully there is no typographical error. So I'm just going to come here and say npm run backend, and then I'll just hit enter. All right, so it's trying to connect. Aha, so we have an error somewhere. Let me just scroll up and see what it is, because it will tell us what the error is. So it says mongoose error. The URI parameter to open URL must be a string, not undefined. Okay, so make sure the blah 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 to mongoose.connect. Okay, so I think I see where the problem is. So the tiny problem we're having here is because in our server.js, we did not give this server.js file the permission to access our .env file. Okay, so I'm actually happy that we ran into this error so that we can see the importance of most things we do. All right, so to give this server.js the permission to access our .env file, in other words, to be able to access this Mongo URI, what we need to do is we need to come up here. So I'll just even make it the first line, and I'll say const, I'll then say .env, so that's going to be the name, and that's going to be equal to, remember, require, let's open up our parenthesis, and in here I'm just going to specify the name of the package, which is .env. Now for us to activate or to initiate this process, we'll just need to add one more string here. So it's going to be .config, like so. So config, and then you're going to call it like a function. So this is what we needed to do to make sure that our application has access to our .env file. Now if I go ahead and save this guy, I'll need to restart my server. Okay, so you see it has already restarted by itself because we connected with we connected with NodeMon. So you see here it says server running on port 5000 and then MongoDB connected, and then it has given us the this connection string here. Now of course I don't want to have this connection string here every time, so I'll just come to my connect DB here and just get rid of this guy. So MongoDB connected is just fine with me. So if you save that, it will restart, and then it will say server running on port 5000 and MongoDB connected. Now this way is absolutely fine, but there's something wrong here, and that is the fact that the server actually starts running first before MongoDB is connected. So this can actually lead to some kind of problems in the future when you start using your application, because technically what you want is you want the MongoDB to be connected first before the server starts running. So connect to MongoDB first, make sure everything is fine with the MongoDB connection, and then fire off the server. That's technically what you want, because if your server starts running and there's a request that's made to MongoDB immediately, then it's going to throw an error. I don't know if you get what I'm trying to say, but let's just see how we can modify this connection process in our server.js. So in our server.js, I'm going to modify the connection process here so that it connects first before the server now fires up and starts running, and I'm going to do that in the next video. All right, so now let's see how we can flip the process to make our MongoDB connection first before we now fire up the server. All right, so for me to do that, in fact, let me just remove this string here since we already have it in our .env file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a function. Let me just create the function just at the bottom here. I'll call that function, I'll create an asynchronous arrow function. So let my shortcut help me, and I'll call that function start server, because that's exactly what it's meant to do. Let's open that up here, and then I'll do my try catch block. So let's do a try catch block. In this try catch block, I'm going to connect first. So you see this connect DB that is here. Technically what I want to do is I'll cut that, and I'll come here and say await connect DB. So in other words, I'm saying that, look, make sure you connect to the DB first before you now connect to the server. This app.listen, watch what's going on here. I'll grab it, Ctrl X, and then I'll just put it here like this, tab. All right, so basically what's going on here is I say before you fire up the server, wait for this connection to the database to be complete. That's exactly what I'm saying here. So now if it connects to the database and the server fires up, if there's a request that is made immediately to the server, then there will be no error because we've already connected to the database. I hope you follow the logic. Now in my catch block, I'll just do a console.log just to keep things simple of any possible error. All right, and then let me see if there's any other thing I need to comment out. Okay, so that's about it. Now I will go ahead and call this start server function. So I'll just come down here and say start server, like so, and then I'll save. Now let's see how it goes now. Okay, great. So now you see we flipped the process. Let me expand this guy up. You see, first we connected to MongoDB, then we now fired up the server. So even if the server, there's a request that runs, immediately the server starts running, there will be no error, because why? We already have connection to our database. All right, unlike before that the server will start running first, then MongoDB will be connected. Okay, I hope you appreciate what we are the way we are trying to structure out the application. Now, this is the first way we can connect to our database with the process of separation of concerns. We've kept the connection function, we've kept it in a separate file. But personally, I think it's a little bit cumbersome. Yes, separation of concerns is great. So in the next video, I'm going to show you the second method with which you can connect to the database, and then you can decide which one is easier for you. All right, see you in the next one then. All right, now let's see the second method we can use to connect to the MongoDB database, which I said is my preferred method. So first off, we're going to need to bring in Mongoose inside of this file here. So let me just bring that in. So I'll come here and say, you know what, I think I already brought in Mongoose in my server file. So where it starts, yeah, this one. Great. So I'll just grab this guy just to save some time. So let's bring that in, but by all means you can type it out so that you can start developing muscle memory. So I'll bring in Mongoose inside my server.js, and then just after my port, I'm going to say Mongoose, and then I'll say .connect. So first off, I'm going to connect. How are we going to connect? Remember, we're going to look for the URI inside of our process, inside of our .env file. So we're going to say process.env, then mongo underscore URI, because that's the name of the variable there. Now, let me bring this to the next line here. So .connect, I'll tap that. Now we can tack on a dot then, because this process is asynchronous. So if I come down here, because it's asynchronous, I can now say dot then. That needs to be small letter. And then I'll just open up an arrow function like this. So let's just make that like so. Inside of this arrow function is where I will now grab this my app.listen, which is to listen to the server. I'll copy that, and then I'll just paste that in here. So it's going to listen, it's going to connect first to MongoDB, then we're going to now listen, fire up the server and listen for any changes. Then if there's any error, let's just come here and maybe catch any possible error. So I'll say .catch, and then I'll just do this twice, and let's just have a error here. Then we're just going to log the error to the console. So let me just do that log, and I'll just say error. This is it. Essentially, this is all we need to connect to MongoDB. So I don't know which one you prefer. Of course, I need to test it first. So let me test it first before I start, talking. So I'll come here and comment out all of these guys that you see here. I'll comment it out so it's null and void. So essentially, this is our connecting to MongoDB and then firing up our server. I'll save that and see if we have any error. So let's hit fire up. Okay, so you see here it says server running on port 5000, and we don't have any error. That's why this is actually able to fire up the server. Ignore the fact that we're not getting any MongoDB connected. If there is any error, none of these processes will fire. So what I'll do is I'll try and simulate an error. So I'll come here, and instead of saying MongoDB URI, I'll say Mongo UR. I'll just remove the I so that this does not exist, and then I'll save. Now watch what happens. Aha, so you see we get an error. So I'll scroll down, scroll up, and you can see it's telling us that the URI parameter blah 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 must be a string. In other words, it's undefined. So I just wanted to show you that before you can make the connection, fire up the server, listen for any changes on the server, it has to connect first. All right, if we go ahead and undo this, so Ctrl Z and then save, then it should fire up, and then we'll get server running on port 5000. Great. So this is the second way we can connect to MongoDB, and I honestly prefer this way because it's just your code is just in one place. So you know what I'm going to do to keep this file clean? I'm just going to copy all of this. I'll cut it, Ctrl X, and I'll just transfer it to this connect DB. Maybe at the bottom here, I'll just paste that in. So you'll have it there. This is what you need to, let me just add a comment here. I'll say, use this function in server.js to connect to MongoDB and start the server. All right, so if you feel like you prefer this first method, which is this long method, in my opinion, you can just transfer this to the server.js, but in all honesty, this is what I prefer. All right, thank you so much, and let's continue the project. All right, so now we've been able to connect to our database, and apparently the next thing we need to do is to be able to interact with the database. So save some data to the database, retrieve data, and stuff like that. But before we do that, there are two things we need to familiarize ourselves with. The first is database model, and the next is schema. These two terms are related. So what's a model? A model refers to the logical structure or layout of your database and how data will be stored, while a schema defines how that data is structured or how that data is organized. In the schema is where we are able to define constraints that are applied to our data. Now, this definition I've just given you is what we are going to see practically just in the next moment. So let me bring this down and let's show you. Now, in the spirit of separating our different components of our application, which is a programming concept called separation of concerns, I'm going to create a separate folder where our model will be stored. So in the back end here, I'll create another folder. I'll call that model, and inside of this model, I'll create a model for our task. So I'll click here and then I'll say task model.js. Now, remember, we installed a package called Mongoose, and we said that that package is going to help us interact with our MongoDB database. So the first thing I'll do is I'll bring in Mongoose here, right? So I'll just say const Mongoose, and that's going to be equal to require, and what we're requiring, Mongoose as well. Now that we've brought in Mongoose, with Mongoose, we're going to create a schema. Right, so you remember we said that the schema is going to determine how we structure the data, how we organize the data, the constraints that are going to be associated with that data. So how do we create a schema? Well, I'll just come here and say const, and then I'll specify the name of the schema. So I'll just call that task schema, schema, and that's going to be equal to, so we're going to create the schema now, Mongoose dot, the schema keyword here is going to start with a capital letter, okay, because it's now a method that is attached to this Mongoose. So Mongoose dot schema, so that should be one S, sorry about that, schema, and we're going to open parentheses. Inside of this parentheses, we're going to have an object, and then inside of the object is where we'll now define the way we want to structure our data. So I want this task schema to have a name. So the name of the task, which I'm going to now come inside here and define the constraints. So the first thing I'll say is I want this data type of this name to be a string. That string is also going to start with a capital letter. So you need to actually be mindful of that. Then I'll say that I also want it to be required. So this is some kind of validation that we are adding to this name field in our task schema. So I'll say required, and I want that to be true so that the user cannot set an empty field or submit an empty field to our database. But what if the user tries to submit an empty field? Well, I would want to maybe give that user some kind of feedback, like an error message or something. So we can just open an array here and say that, okay, first off, I want this required field to be true, then add a comma and say that I want to have an error message like, please add a task. All right, so you see what we just did here? Great. Now, what other fields do we want this task schema to have? Well, I want to be able to know whether the task has been completed or not. So here I'm going to add a completed property, and then I'll just open that up. I'm going to give it a type. So when a task is completed, I'll set it to true. When it's not completed, I'll set it to false. So I'm going to give this a type of Boolean. So true or false is Boolean. It's also going to start with a capital letter. So Boolean. I'll add a comma, and I want it to be required as well. So required, and I'll set that to just true. Then I want it to have a default value. So when a user creates a task initially, I want that task to be set to false. That's the completed status of that task to be set to false. So here I'll say default, and I'll set that to false. You see what's going on here? So now this is what is known as the schema, the skeletal structure, how the data is going to be organized before it's stored in the database. Now this schema, however, needs to be inside the model. So let's come down here, and I'm going to create a task model. How do we do that? Well, I'm going to come here and say const, or you know what, let me just create a task model first. The way you create that is you say mongoose.model. Then you now specify, first of all, the name of the model. So how will that model be stored in the database? I'll give it a name of task. Then I would now attach the schema that I want to, be saved here. So remember, we've created a schema, task schema. So I'll just come here and say task schema. So in our database, we are trying to save a single task using this organization or this structure, which is this task schema. All right, now we've created the model. Let me attach this model to a variable name. So I'll say const, and I'll give it a variable name of capital letter task, like so. So you see what we just did here. Now I can just go ahead and simply export this task so that I can use it in other parts of my application. How am I going to do that? Remember, we're just going to do module.exports, and that's going to be equal to task. Well, my friends, we've been able to create a model and the schema of the way our data will be stored in the database. Now, before we actually, start using this model, though, there's one more thing I would like us to do, and that is to create a timestamp for this particular schema. So let me bring this down here just to, separate it. So you see, inside of this module mongoose.schema, we created this object inside of it. And then what I'll just do is I'll just add a comma after this closing curly braces. I'll come down and create another curly braces. Inside this curly braces is where I'll now add a timestamp. And then stamps, actually plural, timestamps. And then I'll set that to true. What this will do is that it will automatically add a timestamp to any data that we try to store in a database. That timestamp is going to contain two properties: the time you created that database and the time you updated that database, and it will be automatically generated. All right, so that's basically what we just want to add to this schema before we then go ahead and use it in our database. All right, thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.